Shadows in the Valley of Fire. We weren't alone on that mountainside, but the things watching us weren't Taliban. I've replayed that night 1,000 times since coming home, and each time I tell myself there has to be a rational explanation. But when you're pinned down on a rocky outcrop in the Korangal Valley with something hunting you through the darkness, something that moves wrong, sounds wrong, is wrong, rational stops mattering real quick. It started like any other patrol in that godforsaken valley. The Korangal was 6 miles of pure hell carved into eastern Afghanistan. All vertical terrain and thick pine forests that gave perfect cover to anyone wanting to kill Americans. We called it the Valley of Death, and by 2008, it had earned that name 10 times over. My fire team was running overwatch for a larger convoy moving through the valley floor. Staff Sergeant Daniels had us positioned on a ridge about 300 meters up. Me, Red Thompson, our medic Green, and Ellis on the long gun. The afternoon sun was brutal, turning our body armor into portable ovens as we watched the convoy snake through the kill zone below. The ambush came at 16:47 hours. Muzzle flashes erupted from the opposite ridge like angry fireflies, and the convoy started taking heavy fire. We immediately began laying down suppressive fire, trying to give them room to maneuver. The mountains threw our gunfire back at us in endless echoes, creating a wall of sound that made your teeth rattle. Contact left, 200 meters, Ellis called out, his rifle cracking with methodical precision. The man could put a bullet through, a playing card at twice that distance. Red was working the 240 Bravo like he was born to it, brass casings pinging off the rocks around us. Get some, he kept shouting. That Kansas drawl somehow cutting through the chaos. Kid was 19 and thought war was still like the movies. The firefight lasted maybe 20 minutes, but time moves different in combat. Could have been hours, could have been seconds. Then, as suddenly as it started, the shooting stopped. Not the gradual taper you usually get when the enemy breaks contact. This was instant, like someone had thrown a switch. Cease fire, cease fire. Daniels barked, his voice hoarse from shouting over the guns. The silence that followed was wrong. After a firefight, you expect to hear something. Wounded calling out, vehicles moving, even birds returning to the trees. But this was absolute, quiet, the kind that makes your ears ring worse than the gunfire had. Anyone got eyes on? Daniels whispered into his radio. Negative responses came back from all positions. The Taliban fighters had simply vanished. Ellis was scanning through his scope, moving it in slow arcs across the opposite ridge. Sarge, he said quietly, something's not right. That's when I saw them, the shadows. At first I thought it was just the sun playing tricks as it dipped toward the mountain peaks. But shadows don't move against the direction of light. They don't flow uphill like water in reverse. You seeing this? Green asked, his Detroit accent tight with tension. He'd noticed them too. The shadows were pooling in the spaces between rocks, gathering mass and depth that didn't match anything, casting them. They moved with purpose, creeping along the ridgeline toward our position. Maybe it's their camouflage. Captain Walker's voice crackled over the radio from the convoy below. He'd been monitoring our frequency. Some new Taliban technique, but Daniels shook his head slowly, his weathered face pale beneath the dirt and sweat. Sir, I've been in this valley for 8 months. The Taliban don't move like that. As darkness fell properly, our situation got worse. Our night vision showed nothing, no heat signatures, no movement, just empty green static. But we could feel them out there watching, waiting. We need to move, Ellis said. He rarely spoke, so when he did, we listened. My grandmother used to tell stories about things like this, shadow walkers, their hunters, and their patient. Walker's voice came back, dismissive. Corporal, this is a combat zone, not a campfire. Maintain position, and his transmission cut off in a burst of static. Then we heard it. A sound that wasn't quite a scream, wasn't quite static, but something between the two. It came from everywhere and nowhere, surrounding us in the darkness. Red dropped his machine gun and clutched his ears. What the hell is that? He gasped. The sound stopped as abruptly as it had started, leaving us in that oppressive silence again. But now we could hear something else. Footsteps. Not the careful, measured steps of trained fighters, but something heavier, more deliberate. The sound of rocks sliding came from multiple directions. "Tighten the perimeter," Daniels ordered, but his voice cracked slightly. In 2 tours, I'd never heard him sound uncertain. We formed a tight circle, weapons pointing outward. The darkness beyond our position was absolute now, moon hidden behind clouds. Our night vision was useless, just showing us empty rocks and trees that seemed to shift when we weren't looking directly at them. The attack came from above. Something black and fluid dropped onto Red, wrapping around him like liquid night. He screamed. God, that scream, as it dragged him backward. I grabbed for his arm, felt his fingers slip through mine, and then he was gone, pulled into the tree line above our position. His screams echoed for 3 long seconds before cutting off with a wet sound that made my stomach turn. "Fall back! Fall back!" Daniels roared. We scrambled down the rocky slope, boots sliding on loose shale. Behind us, those impossible shadows flowed over our abandoned position like a dark tide. Green stumbled and I hauled him to his feet. Ellis fired 3 shots at something I couldn't see, his rifle's muzzle flash revealing glimpses of shapes that shouldn't exist. Too many angles, too much movement, like smoke given substance and malevolent intent. We ran through the darkness, crashing through pine branches that tore at our gear. The things pursued us, not running but flowing, always just at the edge of our vision. Sometimes they looked almost human in silhouette. Sometimes they looked like nothing that should exist in this world. We found a defensive position, a cluster of boulders forming a natural fortress. Daniels immediately got on the radio, calling for immediate extraction, danger, close air support, anything. But all we got back was static and that not-quite scream sound. "They're jamming us," Green panted, checking his medical supplies with shaking hands. "How can shadows jam our comms?" Ellis was the calmest among us, checking his rifle with practiced efficiency. "They're old," he said simply. "Older than this war, older than any war. The mountains here remember things." For hours we held that position. The shadows would probe our defenses, testing us. We'd fire at movement, muzzle flashes illuminating nightmare glimpses. Elongated limbs, faces that weren't quite faces. Darkness that had learned to hunt. Our ammunition ran low. Green used the last of his flares, buying us minutes of reprieve as the things retreated from the light. Dawn came like salvation. As the first rays of sunlight touched the mountain peaks, the shadows began to recede, flowing back into the deep places between rocks, melting into natural darkness where they belonged. We watched them go, too exhausted and terrified to feel relief. When the rescue helicopter finally arrived, we were down to our last magazines. They found Red's body, what was left of it, scattered across 100 meters of forest. The official report called it a Taliban ambush with unconventional tactics. Captain Walker, who survived whatever had happened to the convoy, signed off on it without meeting our eyes. Daniels took a medical discharge 3 months later. Green transferred to a desk job in Kabul. Ellis finished his tour, but never spoke about that night again. And me? I came home with a purple heart and memories that no amount of therapy can rationalize. The Korangal Valley was abandoned by U.S. forces in 2010. Command said it wasn't strategically important enough to justify the casualties. But I know the real reason. Some places aren't meant for us. Some darkness is older than our wars, our flags, our reasons for fighting. And sometimes, on quiet nights when shadows pool too deeply in the corners of my room, I remember that we weren't alone on that mountainside. The things watching us weren't Taliban. They were something far worse. Natural darkness where they belonged. We watched them go, too exhausted and terrified to feel relief. When the rescue helicopter finally arrived, we were down to our last magazines. They found Red's body, what was left of it, scattered across 100 meters of forest. The official report called it a Taliban ambush with unconventional tactics. Captain Walker, who survived whatever had happened to the convoy, signed off on it without meeting our eyes. Daniels took a medical discharge 3 months later. Green transferred to a desk job in Kabul. Ellis finished his tour, but never spoke about that night again. And me? I came home with a purple heart and memories that no amount of therapy can rationalize. The Korangal Valley was abandoned by U.S. forces in 2010. Command said it wasn't strategically important enough to justify the casualties. But I know the real reason. Some places aren't meant for us. Some darkness is older than our wars, our flags, our reasons for fighting. And sometimes, on quiet nights when shadows pool too deeply in the corners of my room, I remember that we weren't alone on that mountainside. The things watching us weren't Taliban. They were something far worse. The well of Kandahar. We thought it was just an old village well, until the water started screaming. The memory still haunts me, even now, 15 years later. Sometimes, I wake up in cold sweats, hearing those sounds echoing from somewhere deep, beneath the earth. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning, back when I was Private Carter, 21 years old and foolish enough to think I understood the world. It was October 2009, and our squad had been tasked with clearing a small village about 30 clicks south of Kandahar. Intelligence suggested it might be a Taliban supply route, though when we rolled in that scorching afternoon, the place looked like it had been abandoned for decades. The mud brick houses stood empty, their windows like hollow eye sockets staring at nothing. The smell of burned trash and decay hung thick in the air, mixed with that particular Afghan dust that seemed to coat everything in a fine layer of grit. Sergeant Lewis, our squad leader from Brooklyn, gathered us around the Humvee as we surveyed the ghost town. "Standard sweep," he barked, wiping sweat from his weathered face. "Murphy, you and Jenkins take the north side. Diaz, you're with me on the south. Carter, you get the fun job of checking that well in the center." I looked where he was pointing and saw it immediately. A circular stone structure right in the middle of what must have been the village square. Even from a distance, something about it seemed wrong. The stones were darker than the surrounding buildings, almost black and covered in what looked like intricate carvings. "Why me?" I asked, adjusting my rifle strap. "Because you're the college boy." Diaz laughed, his Miami accent thick in the heat. "You can appreciate the, what do you call it, archaeological significance." He was always cracking jokes, using humor to mask the constant fear we all carried. Lieutenant Murphy, our ambitious Texas-born officer, checked his watch impatiently. "Let's move, people. I want this place cleared before nightfall." Corporal Jenkins, the quiet family man from Georgia, crossed himself before heading toward the northern buildings. He'd been doing that more often lately, especially after what we'd seen in Helmand Province the month before. As the others spread out, I approached the well alone. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly and flies buzzed around my head in lazy circles. The closer I got, the more detailed the carvings became. They weren't Arabic script or any Afghan tribal markings I'd seen before. These symbols looked older, much older, like something from a forgotten civilization. Spirals and geometric patterns, intertwined with what looked like human figures, or maybe they were meant to be something else entirely. The well's opening was covered by heavy wooden planks, gray with age and held down by stones. I called out to the others that I was going to check inside, then began moving the rocks. The wood creaked ominously as I pried up the first plank. That's when I heard the voice. "No, mister. Please, no." I spun around to find an old Afghan man standing, about 20 feet away. He must have been hiding in one of the buildings. His clothes were tattered, his face weathered like old leather, but his eyes were filled with genuine terror. "It's okay, grandfather," I said in my broken Pashto, using the respectful term, "just checking for weapons." He shook his head, violently pointing at the well. "Shaitan," he whispered. "Devil, many years, many bodies. They speak in the dark." Before I could respond, Sergeant Lewis's voice boomed across the square. "Carter, what's the situation?" The old man looked between us, then melted back into the shadows between the buildings like smoke. I never saw him again. "Just an old local," I called back. "Says the well is bad news. Since when do we take tactical advice from civilians?" Murphy's voice was sharp with impatience. "Finish your sweep, Private." I turned back to the well and removed the remaining planks. The opening was maybe 4 feet across, the stones around it worn smooth by countless hands over the centuries. I clicked on my flashlight and peered down. The well was dry, had been for years, maybe decades. But it was deep, deeper than my light could penetrate, and there was something wrong with the way sound behaved down there. When I called out hello, my voice seemed to echo and twist, coming back distorted, almost like, "Find anything interesting, college boy?" Diaz appeared beside me, making me jump. "It's dry," I said, trying to shake off the uneasiness. "But these carvings, I've never seen anything like them." Diaz glanced at the symbols with disinterest. "Probably just local religious stuff. You know how superstitious these people are." We finished our sweep as the sun began to set, painting the village in shades of orange and red. No weapons, no Taliban presence, no sign of recent activity. Just empty buildings and that damned well sitting in the center like a malignant tumor. We set up camp in the largest building, a 2-story structure that offered good sightlines in all directions. Murphy posted watches and we settled in for the night, heating MREs and trying to ignore the oppressive silence that seemed to press in from all sides. It was around 200 hours when we first heard it. Crying. At first I thought it was the wind. Afghanistan's desert winds could make the strangest sounds. But this was different. It was definitely human, a low, mournful sobbing that seemed to rise from the earth itself. Jenkins was on watch. "You guys hearing this?" he whispered into his radio. We all were. The sound was coming from outside, but when we looked through the windows, the village square was empty, bathed in pale moonlight. The crying continued, rising and falling like a lament. "It's coming from the well," I said, and immediately regretted speaking. Murphy grabbed his rifle. "Probably insurgents hiding down there." "Carter, you know that well better than anyone. Think someone could be hiding at the bottom?" I thought about how deep it had appeared, how my voice had echoed strangely. "Maybe. But sir, that old man, I don't want to hear about local superstitions, Private. We're soldiers, not ghost hunters." The crying stopped abruptly, leaving behind a silence that was somehow worse than the sound had been. Lewis made the call. "We go out there and check it properly. Murphy, you and Diaz cover us. Jenkins, you're lowering Carter down on a rope. Sarge, I don't think—" I started. "That's an order, Private." 10 minutes later, I found myself standing at the edge of the well, again, this time in the dead of night. The moon cast everything in silver and black, and the carved symbols seemed to writhe in the shifting shadows. Jenkins had tied a climbing rope around my waist, the other end secured to the Humvee. "You sure about this, brother?" Jenkins asked quietly. His southern accent was thicker when he was nervous. I wasn't sure about anything, but I nodded anyway. The descent started normally enough. The well's walls were smooth stone, worn by centuries of weather and hands. My flashlight beam danced ahead of me as I rappelled down, revealing more of those strange carvings. But as I went deeper, I began to notice something else. Bones. At first, just a few scattered fragments embedded in the walls. Then more, much more. Human skulls grinned at me from crevices in the stone. Femurs and rib cages were mortared into the very structure of the well, as if the thing had been built as much from human remains as from rock. "Carter, report." Lewis's voice crackled through my radio, distorted by the depth. "Sarge, this isn't just a well," I called up. "It's some kind of burial site. There are human bones everywhere." I kept descending. 20 feet, 30, 40. The bones grew thicker, more numerous. Some looked ancient, yellowed with age, but others looked much more recent. That's when I reached the bottom. The floor of the well was covered in skulls, hundreds of them, maybe thousands, stretching back into darkness that my flashlight couldn't penetrate. They formed a carpet of death, eye sockets staring up at me accusingly, and from somewhere in that ossuary I could hear something moving, scratching, shifting, and then, impossibly, whispering. The voices spoke in languages I didn't recognize, but somehow I understood their meaning. They were hungry. They were angry, and they had been waiting so very long for fresh company. "Get me out of here," I screamed into my radio. "Get me out now." The rope went taut as Jenkins began pulling me up. I rose through the darkness, past the embedded bones, past the leering skulls, toward the circle of stars that marked the surface. I was maybe 10 feet from the top when the rope went slack. I fell. Not far, just a few feet, but enough to slam. Into the wall hard. Above me I could hear shouting, cursing, the sound of equipment being moved. Then Jenkins's voice, tight with panic. "The rope! Jesus Christ, the rope!" I looked up and saw it dangling above me, the end frayed and bloody as if it had been chewed through by massive teeth. But that was impossible. There was nothing up there but my squad. Nothing that could have. The whispering from below grew louder, more insistent. The skulls at the bottom began to rattle against each other, like chattering teeth. And then I heard new voices joining. The ancient chorus, voices speaking English, recent additions to the well's ghastly collection. "We've been waiting for you, Carter," one of them said. "Join us. The well is so very lonely." Above me, Lewis was shouting orders. "Throw down another rope. Move your asses." But as they worked to get me out, I realized something that chilled me to the bone. The voices weren't coming from below anymore. They were coming from above, from the village square, spoken by throats that should have been attached to my squad mates. When they finally pulled me out, using equipment straps tied together, I looked into their faces and saw nothing but concern and relief. But for just a moment in the shifting moonlight, I could have sworn I saw something else in their eyes. Something hungry and patient and very, very old. We left that village before dawn, Murphy calling in our report as we drove away. No enemy. Activity. Recommend site be marked as cleared, but I know better now. That well wasn't just a burial ground, it was a trap, a mouth that had been feeding for centuries. And sometimes in the darkest part of the night I wonder if we really all made it out, or if something else came back with us, wearing our faces, speaking with our voices, waiting for the right moment to add more bones to its ancient collection. Because here's the thing about the Well of Kandahar. It's patient. It's been patient for a very long time. And it's still hungry. The water may have dried up long ago, but the thirst remains. For too long, the head sat at an odd angle, and when it moved, there was no sound of equipment jangling or boots on stone. "We need to get out of here," I whispered to the others. "Now." But Harris was transfixed, staring at the approaching figure. "Miller? Miller, is that you?" The thing that wore Miller's face opened its mouth, and Miller's voice came out. "Help me, Lieutenant. I'm hurt. Come closer." As it spoke, I noticed that its mouth didn't quite sync with the words, like a badly dubbed movie. O'Connor raised his rifle. "That's not Miller. Stand down," Harris snapped. "That's our—" The thing lunged forward with inhuman speed, covering 30 feet in what seemed like a single bound. Harris screamed as it wrapped those two long arms around him, and then both figures, Harris and the Miller thing, simply faded into the shadows like smoke. The radio exploded with Harris's voice. "This is Lieutenant Harris. I'm okay. I'm in the compound to the west. Come find me." But we'd just watched Harris disappear into the dark. "Run," Ramirez whispered. We run. Now we ran. Through the maze of compounds, past doorways that seemed to shift when we weren't looking directly at them, over walls that felt too smooth under our hands. Behind us, our own voices called from the radio, begging us to come back, to help, to not leave each other behind. I don't remember much about the extraction. Somehow we made it back to the FOB. The official report listed Miller and Harris as KIA, killed by an IED that our explosive ordnance team never found. Ramirez transferred out a week later. O'Connor stopped talking altogether and was eventually discharged on medical grounds. But sometimes late at night when I'm trying to sleep, my radio crackles to life. Miller's voice calling my name. Harris asking for help. And sometimes this is the part that keeps me awake. I hear my own voice calling back to them from somewhere I've never been. The last time we heard Sergeant Miller's voice on the radio, It wasn't his voice anymore. And sometimes I wonder, when I speak now, is it really mine? The last radio check. The last time we heard Sergeant Miller's voice on the radio, it wasn't his voice anymore. I keep telling myself that, trying to make sense of what happened in that godforsaken valley in Helmand Province. But every time I close my eyes, I hear it again. That thing wearing Miller's voice like an ill-fitting mask, calling my name through the static. My name is Private First Class David Jackson, and I'm probably the only one left who can tell this story. The others, well, I'll get to that. It started on September 15th, 2011. Just another night patrol in a province that had already swallowed too many good men. The temperature had dropped from the usual hellish heat to something that bit through our gear and settled into our bones. Sergeant Miller was leading our 5-man squad through a series of abandoned compounds about 10 clicks northwest of our FOB. Intelligence suggested Taliban movement in the area, but intel in Afghanistan was about as reliable as the weather forecast, which is to say, not at all. "Stay sharp, boys," Miller's voice crackled through our comms. He was a career soldier, 23 years in, with hands like leather and a voice that could cut through mortar fire. "Jackson, keep your eyes on those ridge lines. O'Connor, watch our 6. I was 19 and had been in country for exactly 47 days. Everything still felt surreal, like I was playing soldier in the most elaborate video game ever created. The compound walls cast long shadows in the moonlight, creating a maze of silver and black that seemed to shift when you weren't looking directly at it. Corporal Ramirez moved up beside me, his M4 tracking left as mine tracked right. He was from El Paso, had joined up after his auto shop went under in 2008. "You good, rookie?" he whispered. I nodded, though I wasn't sure he could see it in the dark. The night vision goggles made everything look like we were swimming through green. "Soup point radio check," came Lieutenant Harris's voice through our headsets. He was new to command, maybe 25, from Chicago. Still believed the brass when they said we were winning hearts and minds out here. "Sound off. Miller, good copy. Ramirez, Lima Charlie O'Connor, 5x5. Jackson, good to go. Standard procedure, nothing unusual. Just 5 American boys a long way from home, checking in with each other in the dark." That was the last normal radio check we'd ever do. We were about 300 meters into the compound complex when the wind died. I mean, completely died, like someone had flipped a switch. The sudden silence was so complete it felt like pressure in my ears. Even our footsteps seemed muffled. Anyone else notice it got real quiet real fast? O'Connor's Boston accent cut through the comm. He was a wise ass, but he had good instincts. "Movement," Miller whispered. 2 o'clock, about 50 meters. We all froze, weapons raised. Through my NVGs, I could see the crumbling walls of what had probably been someone's home before the war came through. Nothing moved. "False alarm," Miller said after 30 seconds. Must have been debris in the wind, but there wasn't any wind anymore. We pressed on, threading through narrow alleyways between the compounds. The architecture was all wrong. Doorways that led nowhere, windows placed too high or too low, like whoever built these places had never seen a human being before. I tried to shake off the feeling that we were walking through a funhouse mirror version of a village. That's when Miller went dark. 1 second he was there, taking point about 20 meters ahead of us. The next second his comms went silent and his IR strobe, the little infrared light that let us track each other through the NVGs, vanished. "Miller, report," Harris called. "Static. Miller, do you copy?" "Nothing." We moved up to his last known position, weapons ready. There was no sign of him. No blood, no scuff marks in the dust, no equipment. It was like he'd just stepped through a door into another dimension. "Spread out, find him," Harris ordered. But his voice had that tight quality that meant he was fighting panic. That's when Miller's voice came through our radios. "Help me." Just those. 2 words, but something was wrong with them. They had Miller's cadence, his gruff tone, but underneath there was something else. Something that made my skin crawl. "Miller, what's your position?" Harris called. "Help me. I'm in the compound. I can't. Help me." The voice was coming from everywhere and nowhere, crackling through our headsets with that hollow, distant quality you get with a weak signal. But that wasn't possible. Our comms had been crystal clear all night. Ramirez pointed toward a 2-story compound about 50 meters to our east. Movement on the roof. We all looked. There, silhouetted against the stars, was a figure. It raised one arm and waved. "Miller?" I called out. The figure waved again. "That's him," Harris said, relief flooding his voice. "Miller, stay put. We're coming to you." But as we moved toward the compound, O'Connor grabbed my arm. "Jackson," he whispered, "look at your GPS." I checked the little screen clipped to my vest. According to the satellite, Miller's transponder was still showing his last known position about 20 meters behind us, right where he'd disappeared. I looked back at the rooftop. The figure was still there, still waving. "Lieutenant," I started to say, but Harris was already moving toward the compound, following what he thought was our missing sergeant. That's when things got really wrong. O'Connor's radio crackled to life with his own voice. "I'm hurt. I'm in the compound to the south. Please help." But O'Connor was standing right next to me. Ramirez's voice joined the chorus. "This is Ramirez. I'm trapped. Building collapsed. Need immediate assistance." Ramirez looked at me with wide eyes. "That ain't me, man. That ain't me." The voices kept coming, each one a perfect mimicry of our squad, all calling for help from different directions. Our own voices, pleading with us to abandon each other and come alone into the dark. Harris had stopped moving toward the compound, his head swiveling as he tried to track the impossible radio chatter. What the hell is going on? The figure on the rooftop, the thing that looked like Miller, began to descend, moving with a fluid grace that was nothing like our sergeant's weathered gait. As it got closer, I could see it more clearly through my NVGs. It had Miller's face, Miller's uniform, Miller's gear, but the proportions were subtly wrong, like someone had tried to reconstruct him from a description rather than from life. The arms,